The sound that tore me from my sleep wasn't a nightmare. It was the shrill, insistent ring of my phone on the nightstand. I blinked, my eyes struggling to focus in the pitch-black room. The digital clock glowed to 17 a.m. My heart hammered against my ribs. No one called it this hour unless something was terribly wrong. Mark. My first thought was always Mark. I rolled over, reaching for his side of the bed. The sheets were cold. Of course. He was working late again. He'd said, a deadline for the new tower. I fumbled for the phone, my thumb swiping clumsily across the screen. Hello. My voice was a raw croak. Ellie. It's Chloe. The name registered slowly. A file pulled from a distant cabinet in my sleep-addled brain. Chloe. Mark's assistant. Young. Efficient. With a perpetually bright smile. Why was she calling me at 2 a.m.? Chloe. What is it? Is Mark okay? A choked sob came through the line. He's had an accident. The world tilted. The 4 words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. What? What kind of accident? Where's he? A car. On the I-5. He's at Harborview Medical Center. He's conscious. Ellie. He's okay. But you should come. I didn't remember hanging up. I was already out of bed, pulling on the first clothes I could fingens. A sweater. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip my jacket. The drive downtown was a blur of slick, rain-swept streets, the city lights bleeding together through my tear-filled eyes. The windshield wipers squeaked a frantic, rhythmic beat that matched the pounding in my head. He's conscious. He's okay. Chloe's words looped in my mind, a fragile mantra against the terrifying images my imagination was conjuring. I abandoned my car in the hospital's emergency bay and ran inside. The cold, sterile air shocked to my system. A nurse pointed me down a long, fluorescent-lit corridor. Room E4. My footsteps echoed in the unnatural quiet of the late-night hospital. And then I saw them. The door to the room was slightly ajar. Through the narrow gap, I could see Mark. He was sitting up on the edge of the gurney. He wasn't covered in blood or attached to a web of machines. He had a bandage on his forehead and a scrape on his cheek. But he was alive. He was whole. A wave of relief so powerful it made my knees weak washed over me. But the relief was instantly choked off by what I saw next. Chloe was there, her back to me. She was leaning over him, her hand gently stroking his uninjured cheek. Her shoulders were shaking. Mark reached up, his hand covering hers. He whispered something I couldn't hear. She nodded, then leaned down, and she kissed him. It wasn't a quick, comforting peck on the cheek. It was a deep, lingering kiss, a kiss of shared intimacy, of a secret world I had just stumbled upon. In that sterile, silent hallway, under the cold, humming lights, my entire life shattered into a million pieces. The sound was deafening, but only I could hear it. But that moment of shattering clarity, the one that would redefine everything I thought I knew, came later. First, there was the before. 2 weeks earlier, the morning sun, a rare and welcome guest in a Seattle autumn, streamed through the large windows of our home, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. The air smelled of freshly ground coffee and the salty tang of Puget Sound, drifting up from the shore below. It was, by all accounts, a perfect morning in a perfect life. From the kitchen, I watched Mark knot his silk tie, his reflection captured in the glass. He was a handsome man. I had known that from the first day I saw him lecture on sustainable architecture at the university. He moved with a quiet confidence that was both commanding and gentle. He walked in like he owned the world, but in a way that made you want to give it to him. You're staring, he said, catching my eye in the reflection. A slow smile spread across his face. I smiled back, walking over to him and straightening the knot of his tie. I'm admiring. There's a difference. He leaned in and kissed me. A familiar, comfortable kiss that tasted of coffee and mint. I'll be late tonight. The Henderson project is in its final stages. Don't wait up. Again. The question slipped out before I could stop it, a small note of disappointment in my voice. He sighed, his brow furrowing slightly. I know. I'm sorry. Just a few more weeks of this. I promise. Then we'll take that trip to the coast. Just you and me. He brushed a stray piece of hair from my face, his touch instantly soothing my small flicker of annoyance. That was Mark's gift. He knew exactly how to smooth over the rough edges. I nodded, forcing a smile. Okay. I'll see you later. He was gone a moment later, the scent of his expensive cologne lingering in the air. I stood there for a long time, looking out at the calm, gray water of the Sound. Our life was beautiful. Our house, a modern masterpiece of glass and cedar that Mark had designed himself, was my sanctuary. My pottery studio, a converted garage space filled with light, was my haven. We had everything we had ever talked about wanting. So why did I feel this tiny, persistent hum of unease, like a single string on a violin that was just slightly out of tune? I shook it off and went to my studio. The clay was waiting. My hands, caked in drying earth, knew this language better than any other. I could mold it, shape it, fire it until it became something strong and beautiful. I could control it. Here, in my studio, the world made sense. I was preparing for a small gallery show in Fremont, a collection inspired by the duality of the Seattle landscape with hard, unyielding concrete of the city against the soft, persistent green of nature. That afternoon, my best friend Sarah stopped by, a carton of coffee in her hand and a critical look in her eye as she surveyed my work in progress. Sarah and I were opposites, where I was quiet and content. She was a whirlwind of pain-splattered energy and blunt opinions. "This is new," she said, tapping a finger against a large, asymmetrical vase with a fractured glaze. "It's angry." I laughed, wiping my hands on my apron. "It's not angry. It's expressing tension." "Tension. Right." She took a sip of her coffee, her eyes scanning my face. "Is everything okay with you and Mark?" The question caught me off guard. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" She shrugged, a gesture that was deceptively casual. "I don't know. He just seems distant lately. And you seem a little wound up. When was the last time you two had a real night out? Just for fun?" I thought about it. The last few weeks had been a blur of Mark's late nights and my long hours in the studio. He's just stressed. "Sarah, this new skyscraper project is huge. It's a career maker for him." I heard the defensive tone in my own voice and hated it. A career is one thing, Ellie. A marriage is another. Just make sure he's not forgetting which one keeps him warm at night. I wanted to be annoyed with her, but I couldn't. Sarah saw things I often chose to ignore. She saw the tiny cracks in the glaze that I insisted were just part of the design. Later that evening, the truth of her words echoed in the empty house. I made dinner, but Mark called at 8 to say he was stuck in a meeting and had already eaten. I sat alone at our long dining table, designed to seat 12, and picked up my salad. I cleaned the kitchen, then went to my studio, but the clay felt foreign in my hands. Restless, I decided to read in bed. I picked up the book on Mark's nightstand, and his phone, which was lying next to it, lit up with a notification. It was a text. I didn't mean to look. I never looked at his phone, but my eye snagged on the name before I could stop myself. Chloe Jensen. The message preview was short. "Thinking of you. Can't wait for Portland." Portland. Mark had a business trip to Portland coming up in a few days. It was just his assistant coordinating logistics. That was all. I repeated the words to myself, a desperate litany. It's her job. She's his assistant. But there was an emoji at the end of the message. A single red heart. My stomach clenched. It was just a heart. People used emojis all the time. It didn't mean anything. It was probably a friendly, professional thing. I was being ridiculous. Paranoid. When Mark came home after midnight, I was pretending to be asleep. He undressed quietly in the dark, slid into bed, and wrapped an arm around me, his body warm against my back. He smelled faintly of perfume, not the citrusy scent I wore, but something sweeter, more floral. "You're awake," he whispered, his lips against my hair. "Just barely." I murmured back, not turning to face him. "I'm sorry I'm so late." "It's okay. How was the meeting?" He hesitated for just a fraction of a second, but I felt it. A tiny tightening in his arm around me. Long. Unproductive. The usual. He kissed the back of my neck. "Go back to sleep. I love you. I love you, too," I said to the darkness. But for the first time in our 10 years together, the words felt like they were made of something brittle, something that might break if I said them too loudly. I lay there for hours after his breathing had evened out into a deep sleep, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, the text message, the perfume, the hesitation. They were small things, insignificant things. They were cracks, and I suddenly had the terrifying feeling that if I looked too closely, I would see that they ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. I told myself I was being crazy. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to believe the story Mark told me, every day's story of our perfect life. It was so much easier than contemplating the alternative. The next day, I focused on my work with a new intensity, trying to sweat out the anxiety through physical labor. I spent hours at the potter's wheel, the rhythmic whirring the only sound in the studio. I was shaping a large bowl, my hands moving with practiced ease, when Mark called. "Hey, beautiful," he said, his voice cheerful. Too cheerful. "Listen. Something's come up. I have to head to Portland a day early. The clients moved up the presentation." I stopped the wheel, my hands still slick with wet clay. "Oh, okay. So you're leaving today?" "In about an hour. I'm just packing a bag now. I probably won't have a chance to see you before I go." "Mark." "Wait," I said, a sudden, cold dread washing over me. "I can come home. I can help you pack." No, don't be silly. You stay there and make your beautiful things. I've got it under control. I'll call you from the hotel tonight." "Okay," I said, my voice small. "Be safe. Always. I love you. I love you," I replied. But he had already hung up. I stood in the silence of my studio, the half-finished bowl sitting motionless on the wheel. "Can't wait for Portland." Chloe's text. A single red heart. He was leaving a day early. I felt a wave of nausea. This was what paranoia felt like. It was a poison, seeping into the rational parts of my brain, twisting everything into something ugly. He was on a business trip. His assistant was on the same trip. It was normal. It was professional. I took a deep breath and forced myself to clean up. I would go home, make a nice dinner for myself, and have a quiet night. I would trust my husband, because the alternative was unthinkable. The alternative was a lie so profound it would mean our entire life. This beautiful house, our shared history, was all built on a foundation of sand, and I wasn't ready to watch it all wash away into the cold, gray waters of the Sound. Not yet. That night, alone in our large, empty bed, I clung to denial like a life raft. Paranoia was a sickness of the mind. I told myself. It fed on insecurities and grew in the dark. Mark loved me. He had built this life for us. With me. An emoji and a floral perfume were not evidence. They were static, meaningless noise in an otherwise clear signal. I fell asleep repeating those assurances until they felt almost true. Mark was gone for 3 days. They felt like a lifetime. He called each night, his voice warm and familiar over the phone, telling me about his meetings, about the dreary Portland rain, about how much he missed me. He never mentioned Chloe. I never asked. I was afraid that speaking her name would give my fears a shape, a substance they didn't deserve. When he came home, it was with a flourish. He swept into the house, dropping his suitcase and wrapping me in a hug that lifted me off my feet. "God, I missed you." He breathed into my hair. He presented me with a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a single, teardrop-shaped pearl. "It's beautiful," I whispered, my fingers tracing the cool, smooth surface. "I saw it in a little artisan shop and thought of you," he said, his eyes shining with sincerity. He fastened it around my neck, his fingers warm against my skin. "It looks perfect." I looked at my reflection in the hall mirror. The pearl rested in the hollow of my throat, luminous and elegant. It was a beautiful gesture, a loving gesture, and it made me feel sick with guilt for ever doubting him. That night, he made love to me with a desperate, hungry energy that felt less like passion and more like a performance, an act of reassurance, or maybe, an act of penance. I tried to push the thought away, to lose myself in the familiar comfort of his arms. But a small, cold part of me remained separate, a silent observer watching a play unfold. The following week and a half was a careful dance of normalcy. We fell back into our routines. He went to work. I went to my studio. We had dinner together. We talked about our days. We watched movies on the couch. On the surface, everything was perfect. But I had started to notice things. Small things I had previously been blind to. I noticed the way he angled his phone away from me when a text came in. The way he sometimes took calls out on the deck. His voice a low murmur carried away by the wind. One afternoon, while looking for a stamp in his desk drawer, I found a receipt from a restaurant in Queen Anne, a romantic, expensive place we hadn't been to in years. The date was from a night 2 weeks ago. A night he had told me he was working late with his team. The bill was for 2. Each discovery was a tiny paper cut on my soul. Each one, on its own, was explainable. A business dinner. A private work call. A phone tilted for better light. But together, they formed a mosaic of deceit that was becoming harder and harder to ignore. Sarah saw it, too. We met for lunch on a gray, drizzly afternoon. You're quiet, she observed, picking at her salad. What's wrong? I hesitated. Then the words tumbled out in a hushed, frantic whisper. The text from Chloe. The perfume. The early trip to Portland. The restaurant receipt. She listened patiently, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When I was finished, she reached across the table and put her hand on mine. Ellie, she said softly, none of these things are proof. But you have to stop making excuses for him. You have to trust your gut. Your gut is telling you something is wrong. But what if I'm wrong? My voice broke. What if I accuse him and I'm just being a jealous, paranoid wife? I could destroy everything. Sarah, everything we built. What's worth more? She asked, her gaze unwavering. A beautiful house built on a lie. Or a small, messy truth you can build a real life on. Her words stayed with me, haunting my days and nights. I felt like I was living in two worlds at once. In one, I was Ellie Vance, the happy, successful artist, married to the perfect man. In the other, I was a detective in my own life, sifting through clues, terrified of what I might find. The tension was becoming unbearable. It seeped into my art. The graceful, balanced forms I used to create were gone. Now, my hands shaped jagged, fractured pieces. They were raw and unsettling. They were honest. And so we arrived at that night. The night it all ended. Mark had called around 7. His voice strained. It's going to be another all-nighter. Elle, we're trying to meet this deadline. I'm so sorry. It's okay, I said, the light tasting like ash in my mouth. I understand. I ate alone. Again. I tried to work in the studio, but my hands wouldn't cooperate. I felt a strange, electric anxiety humming just beneath my skin. I gave up and went to bed early, hoping to find escape in sleep. Then the phone rang. To 17 a.m. A number I didn't recognize. Hello, Ellie. It's Chloe. Her voice was high-pitched with panic. He's had an accident. In that moment, every suspicion, every doubt, every ugly thought I'd had for the past 2 weeks vanished, incinerated by a single, primal fear. The fear of losing him. The carefully constructed walls of my resentment crumbled, and all that was left was the love I had for him, raw and terrifying in its intensity. My husband was hurt. Nothing else mattered. I drove through the rain-slicked streets of Seattle in a blind panic, my mind a chaotic slideshow of worst-case scenarios. I prayed. I bargained with a God I wasn't sure I believed in. Please, let him be okay. I'll do anything. I'll never doubt him again. Just let him be okay. I burst into the emergency room, my heart threatening to beat its way out of my chest. A tired nurse directed me down the hall. Room E4. My hands were ice cold, my breath catching in my throat. I slowed as I approached the door, suddenly terrified of what I would find on the other side. The door was open just a crack. I peered through, and there was Mark, sitting on the gurney, not dying, not broken. He was alive. The relief was a physical thing, a wave that started in my chest and spread through my limbs, making me want to collapse right there on the polished floor. He was okay. My prayer had been answered. But the prayer had a cruel twist I never saw coming. Chloe was with him, her back to me. She was murmuring to him, her hand on his face. He leaned into her touch. It was a gesture so intimate, so familiar. It made the air freeze in my lungs. He whispered something. She leaned down, and they kissed. Time stopped. The distant beep of a heart monitor, the squeak of a nurse's shoes down the hall. My own ragged breathing it all faded away into a deafening silence. There was only that image, burned onto the back of my eyelids. The image of my husband kissing his assistant in a hospital room at 2 a.m. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a revelation. It was the key that unlocked every lie, every excuse, every late night and every secret phone call. It was the truth, and it was uglier than anything I had ever imagined. I must have made a sound, a small gasp, because they broke apart. Mark's head snapped up. He saw me standing in the doorway, my face a mask of horror. His expression shifted in an instant from tenderness to guilt, then to pure, panicked shock. Ellie, he stammered, scrambling off the gurney. What are you doing here? The question was so absurd. So utterly insane. That for a second, I thought I might laugh. Chloe stepped back, composing herself with terrifying speed. She transformed from a lover into a concerned employee in the blink of an eye. I called her. Mark. I thought she should know. She turned to me, her eyes wide with fake sympathy. Ellie. I am so sorry you had to see that. I was just so overwrought with worry. And with the shock of the accident, I wasn't thinking straight. Mark latched onto the excuse like a drowning man. Yes. That's it. She was just upset. Ellie. It's not what you think. Nothing is going on. They stood there, a united front of deceit, spewing words that meant nothing. They were just sounds, empty vibrations in the air. I looked from Chloe's perfectly practiced expression of remorse to my husband's desperate, lying face. The man I had loved for a decade. The man I thought I knew better than I knew myself. He was a stranger. And our life, our beautiful, perfect life, was a lie. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't say a word. The pain was too vast, too deep for any of that. A strange, cold calm settled over me. I simply looked at him, letting my eyes show him the wreckage he had made. I saw the moment he realized his excuses weren't working. I saw the fear in his eyes. Then I turned around and walked away. Ellie. Wait. He called after me, his voice echoing in the sterile hallway. Ellie. Please. I kept walking. I walked out of the emergency room, into the cold, rainy Seattle night. The rain mixed with the silent tears that were now streaming down my face. I got in my car and drove, with no destination in mind. The city lights were a meaningless blur. The rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers was the only sound in my shattered world. 2 weeks ago, I had been afraid of finding a crack in our perfect life. Now, I was standing in the rubble, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that nothing would ever be perfect again. I don't know how long I drove. The streets of Seattle blurred into a watercolor painting of grief, the neon signs and traffic lights bleeding together through the rain-streaked windshield. I ended up at Gasworks Park, the skeletal remains of the old gasification plant silhouetted against the glittering downtown skyline. I parked the car, shut off the engine, and finally let the sobs come. They were ragged, guttural sounds torn from a place deep inside me I didn't know existed. The pain was a physical entity, a giant hand squeezing my heart, my lungs, my throat, making it impossible to breathe. Our entire marriage felt like a lie. Every I love you, every shared laugh, every promise for the future was now tainted, rewritten as a scene from a cruel play where I was the only one who didn't know my lines. He hadn't just cheated. He had built an entire world without me. A world with her. The kiss wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a glimpse into a life he was already living. The sun was beginning to stain the eastern sky a bruised purple when I finally drove home. Our home. The word felt foreign. I walked through the front door into the beautiful, silent space Mark had designed. Every object seemed to mock me. The photos on the mantelpiece of us smiling on vacation. The pair of coffee mugs side by side on the counter. The indentation of his head still on the pillow in our bed. It was a museum of a life that had never really existed. He was waiting for me, sitting on the edge of the sofa in the living room. He looked terrible. His face was pale, the cut on his forehead a stark red line. He stood up the moment I walked in. Ellie. Thank God. I was so worried. I just looked at him, my expression blank. The calm from the hospital had returned. A cold, protective shell around my shattered heart. Don't, I said, my voice flat. Please, just let me explain. He took a step towards me, his hands outstretched. What you saw, it was a mistake. A stupid, terrible mistake. It meant nothing. Nothing. I finally found my voice, and it was laced with an icy fury. You call that nothing? The way she looked at you? The way you looked at her? Don't insult my intelligence. Mark, don't you dare stand in the house we built and lie to my face again. His composure cracked. Okay. You're right. It wasn't nothing. It happened a few times. It was the stress. The late nights at the office, she was just there. But it's over. Ellie, I swear to you. It's over. I ended it tonight. Before the accident. That's what we were talking about. I was ending it. The lie was so practiced. So plausible. A lesser version of me. A version from 2 weeks ago. Might have wanted to believe it. But I had seen his face. I had seen the kiss. And I knew he was still lying. The accident. I said, latching onto the one solid piece of the story. What happened? He ran a hand through his hair. I was driving her home. I was distracted. We were arguing. I looked away from the road for a second and swerved to avoid another car. Hit the guardrail. The car's a wreck. But we were lucky. Just bumps and bruises. He was driving her home at 2 in the morning. Of course he was. I want you to leave, I said. The words were quiet, but they landed in the silent room with the force of a gunshot. His face fell. What? Ellie. No. We can fix this. I know I screwed up, but we can't throw away 10 years over this. I love you. You are my wife, and you are a liar. I shot back. I look at you and I don't know who you are. Every time you said you were working late. Were you with her? Every business trip? Was Portland just a romantic getaway for the two of you? The question about Portland hung in the air. A baited hook. I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes before he masked it. No. Of course not. Portland was work. Chloe was there in a professional capacity. That's all. Another lie. It was almost impressive. His ability to produce them so effortlessly. Get out. Mark. I repeated. My voice colder this time. Pack a bag and go to a hotel. I can't even look at you right now. He saw the finality in my eyes. He didn't argue further. He just slumped. Defeated. And went upstairs. I stood motionless, listening to the sounds of him opening drawers. The zip of a suitcase. 20 minutes later. He came back down. A small duffel bag in his hand. He stopped in front of me. His eyes pleading. Don't do this. Elle. Don't give up on us. You gave up on us a long time ago. I whispered. You just forgot to tell me. He left. The sound of the front door closing behind him was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I collapsed onto the sofa, the one he had just been sitting on, and stared into space. The house was finally, truly quiet. And in that quiet, I felt an emptiness so vast it threatened to swallow me whole. The next few days were a fog of sleeplessness and disbelief. I called the gallery and told them I needed to postpone my show. The thought of creating, of shaping something beautiful, felt like a bitter joke. I barely ate. I wandered through the rooms of my house like a ghost, touching objects, trying to reconcile the memories they held with the new, harsh reality. Sarah was my anchor. She came over the moment I called her, her face a mixture of fury and heartbreak on my behalf. She didn't say I told you so. She just held me while I cried, brought me food I wouldn't eat, and sat in silence with me when I couldn't speak. What are you going to do? She asked gently on the third day, as we sat on the deck overlooking the gray water. I don't know, I said honestly. Part of me wants to set all of his things on fire. The other part just wants to curl up and disappear. I vote for fire, she said with a grim smile. But first, you need answers. Not his version of the answers. The real ones. You can't start to heal until you know the full extent of the wound. She was right. The not knowing was a poison. Mark's version of the story a brief, meaningless affair that was already over felt too neat. Too convenient. My gut, the one I had ignored for so long, was screaming that there was more. Much more. That night, my grief began to curdle into a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just a victim in this story. I was a wife who had been betrayed. And I deserved the truth. All of it. I started where I should have started weeks ago. His office. It was a space I rarely entered. A sleek, minimalist room filled with architectural books and blueprints. His laptop was on the desk. It was password protected. Of course. But after 10 years, I knew him. I tried our anniversary. No luck. I tried the name of his childhood dog. Nothing. Then, a thought struck me. I typed in the name of the sailboat he had dreamed of buying since he was a boy. Serendipity. The screen unlocked. The ease of it felt like another small betrayal. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I started with his emails. I found a folder labeled personal, and inside, a subfolder titled CJ. Chloe Jensen. My hands were shaking as I clicked on it. There were hundreds of emails, stretching back nearly 2 years. 2 years? Not a few weeks. 2 years of my life had been a lie. I opened the first one. It was innocuous. A note from Mark thanking her for staying late to help with a presentation. But then they grew more familiar. Jokes about coworkers. Lunch plans. Then, flirtation. I couldn't have gotten through that meeting without you. You looked amazing in that blue dress today. Then, the emails became declarations. I read about their first kiss. Stolen in a parking garage after a work dinner. I read about his late nights at the office that were actually nights in her bed. I read about their trips, disguised as business, to Vancouver, to San Francisco, to Portland. The pearl necklace he had given me, he'd bought it on that trip. There wasn't a mail from Chloe. Did you give it to her? I hope she likes it. It feels strange. Me picking out a gift for your wife. But I want her to have something beautiful. The cruelty of it took my breath away. It wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated, long-term deception. They had crafted a whole universe of inside jokes and shared secrets, all while I sat at home, patiently waiting for my husband, making excuses for his absence. But the worst was yet to come. I started looking at his financial records, which he kept meticulously organized on a spreadsheet. I noticed regular payments to a property management company I didn't recognize, and large, recurring wire transfers to a separate bank account, an account I had never heard of. Using the details from the spreadsheet, I managed to log in online. The account was in his name only, and it contained thousands of dollars. My mind raced. The property management company, the secret account. Why would he need them? Sarah's words came back to me. You need the real answers. The next morning, armed with the name of the property management company, I drove to their office in a nondescript building downtown. I walked in, my heart pounding. I told the receptionist a modified version of the truth, that I was Mark Vance's wife, and there had been a mix-up with our mail. I suspected some important documents might have been sent to a property he was leasing through them. I gave her our home address as confirmation. The woman was helpful, sympathetic. She typed his name into the computer. Yes, Mr. Vance. It looks like he leases a unit with us over at the Orion building in South Lake Union. Apartment 1 to be. Let me see if we have any mail for him. South Lake Union. A sleek, modern neighborhood of glass towers and expensive condos. And he had an apartment there. An entire apartment. A secret life. I felt dizzy. I thanked the woman and left before I could break down. I drove straight to the Orion building, a gleaming high-rise that catered to the tech money crowd. I stood across the street, staring up at it, trying to process the information. He had a whole other home, just a few miles from ours. How could I get in? I couldn't just knock. Then I remembered. His old work briefcase, the one he replaced last year but kept for sentimental reasons. It was in the back of his closet. I remembered him tossing a spare set of keys in there once, muttering something about always having a backup. I raced home, my mind numb with purpose. I found the briefcase, and there, in a side pocket, was a small keyring. It held two keys. One was a standard apartment key. The other was an electronic fob. For a building like the Orion, my hands didn't even shake as I drove back. There was no room for fear or hesitation anymore. Only a desperate need to see, to know. I parked in a visitor spot, walked to the main entrance, and held the fob against the sensor. The light turned green. The door clicked open. The air in the lobby was cool and smelled faintly of jasmine. It was oppressively quiet, the kind of expensive silence that absorbs all sound. My footsteps were whispers on the polished marble floor. I walked to the elevator, my reflection a pale, ghostly figure in the mirrored doors. I pressed the button for the 12th floor. The ascent was smooth and silent, a slow-motion journey to the heart of my husband's betrayal. The hallway of the 12th floor was decorated in muted grays and blues, with abstract art on the walls. It felt more like a luxury hotel than an apartment building. I found one to be at the end of the hall. For a moment, I just stood there, the key cold and heavy in my hand. This was a point of no return. Once I opened this door, whatever fragile hope I had of salvaging my marriage, of believing his lies, would be gone forever. I took a deep breath and slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft, sickening click. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. My first thought was that I had the wrong apartment. This wasn't a sterile bachelor pad or a hastily furnished hideaway. It was a home. The afternoon light poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a space that was warm, stylish, and lived in. There was a plush gray sofa, a thick, soft rug on the floor, and shelves filled with books and personal trinkets. It was a smaller, cozier version of the life he had built with me. And then I saw the photographs. They were everywhere. On the bookshelves, on the end tables, framed and hanging on the walls. They were pictures of Mark and Chloe. Mark and Chloe laughing on a boat, the Seattle skyline behind them. Mark and Chloe hiking, their arms around each other, flushed and happy. Mark and Chloe cuddled on this very sofa. A bottle of wine on the coffee table. One photo, in a large silver frame on the console table, showed them standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. A trip he told me was a solo architectural conference. I walked through the apartment like a trespasser in my own life. Every detail was a fresh stab of pain. Her favorite scented candles on the counter. His brand of whiskey on the bar card next to a bottle of her preferred gin. In the bedroom, the closet was filled with his clothes hanging next to hers. Crisp, button-down shirts I had ironed for him, now sharing space with her silk blouses and dresses. On the nightstand, next to a well-read novel, was a small, framed ultrasound picture. I froze. My blood ran cold. An ultrasound. I picked it up with a trembling hand. The date on the corner was from 6 weeks ago. It was a tiny, grainy image of a new life. A life they were creating together. The nausea I'd felt earlier returned with a vengeance. I stumbled to the bathroom and retched into the toilet, my body convulsing with a grief so profound it felt like it was tearing me apart from the inside. When the heaving stopped, I splashed cold water on my face and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger, her eyes wide with a wild, haunted look. My shock was hardening, minute by minute, into a diamond-hard rage. How dare he? How dare he do this to me? To us? How dare he build a second life? A second family? While I was at home, trusting him, loving him, putting my own ambitions on hold to support his? There was one more door in the hallway. It was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The room was painted a soft, gender-neutral yellow. A white crib stood assembled against one wall. A changing table was next to it, with neatly folded stacks of onesies and tiny socks on the shelves. A mobile of smiling, plush stars and moons hung over the crib. It was a nursery. A perfect, hopeful little room waiting for a baby. Their baby. That was the final blow. The one from which there was no recovery. This wasn't just an affair. This was a replacement. He hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been building a new family. A new future. Intending to simply erase me from the equation. The depth of the deception was monstrous. Almost incomprehensible. I backed out of the nursery. A strangled sob caught in my throat. I couldn't stay in this place for another second. This house of lies would suffocate me. I walked out of the apartment, not bothering to lock the door behind me. I fled, running down the silent hallway, jabbing the elevator button, desperate for air, for escape. I drove straight to Sarah's studio in Georgetown. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside, her arms a strong, steady presence around my shaking shoulders. I told her everything, the words spilling out in a broken, incoherent flood. The apartment, the photos, the nursery, the baby. When I finished, she just held me, her own eyes filled with tears of rage for me. That bastard, she whispered, her voice thick with venom. That absolute, soulless bastard. What do I do, Sarah? I asked, my voice barely audible. How do I even begin to deal with this? You don't do anything alone, she said fiercely. First, you're staying with me tonight. You are not going back to that house. Second, tomorrow morning, we are calling the best divorce lawyer in Seattle. She pulled back and looked me straight in the eyes. This is not your shame, Ellie. It's his. You did nothing wrong. You loved him, and he took that love and used it to destroy you. But he's not going to win. We are not going to let him. Her strength was a lifeline. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something other than pain or confusion. It was a tiny spark of anger, of righteous fury. She was right. He wasn't going to destroy me. That night, sleeping on Sarah's lumpy sofa bed, surrounded by the smell of turpentine and oil paint, was the most restful sleep I'd had in weeks. The next morning, I woke up with a clear, cold purpose. The time for crying was over. It was time to fight back. Sarah was already on her laptop, a list of liars on the screen. We chose one, a woman with a reputation for being a shark, and made an appointment for the next day. Then, I did the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. I took out my phone and called Mark. He answered on the first ring, his voice filled with a pathetic, hopeful relief. Ellie, I've been calling you. Where are you? I know, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. I know everything. Mark. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, trying to figure out what I knew. How much I knew. What lie he could possibly spin to get out of this. What are you talking about? He stammered. Apartment 1 to be at the Orion. I said, letting the words land like stones. I saw it all. The photos. The clothes in the closet. The nursery. I paused, letting him absorb the full impact. I saw the ultrasound picture. Mark. The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of a man who had been utterly and completely caught. There were no more lies left to tell. Ellie, he began, his voice cracking. I can explain. No. I cut him off, my voice rising with a power I didn't know I possessed. No. You can't. There is no explanation for this. There is only the truth. And the truth is that you are a monster. You are a liar and a coward. And you have destroyed my life. I want you to come to the apartment. Your other apartment. Meet me there in 1 hour. We are going to talk. For the last time. Ellie. Wait. Please. I hung up. I didn't want to hear his excuses or his pleading. I wanted to face him in the middle of his secret life. I wanted to watch him squirm surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal. Sarah drove me. She held my hand the whole way. Are you sure you want to do this? She asked as we pulled up across the street from the Orion. I have to. I said. I can't move forward until I close this door. And I'm going to slam it shut in his face. She nodded. I'll wait here. Scream if you need me. I walked into the building. My head held high. I felt strangely calm. My emotions packed away in a cold, safe box. I took the elevator up to the 12th floor. The door to 1-2B was still unlocked. Just as I had left it, I walked in and waited. He arrived exactly 1 hour later. He used his own key to let himself in. And his face crumbled when he saw me standing there, in the center of the living room, surrounded by the ghosts of his other life. He looked smaller, weaker, stripped of all his charm and confidence. He just looked like a man who had been caught. Ellie, he whispered, his eyes filled with a theatrical, self-serving misery. Don't, I said, holding up a hand. Don't say my name. I don't want to hear your apologies. I don't want to hear your excuses. They mean nothing to me. I just want to understand one thing. Why? He had the gall to look confused. What do you mean? Why? Why build all of this? I asked, my voice shaking with restrained fury as I gestured around the room. Why the lies? Why not just leave me? If you were so unhappy, if you loved her so much, why not just be a man and end our marriage? Why did you have to do this? Why did you have to try and have both? He finally looked away from me, his gaze falling on the silver-framed photo of him and Chloe in Paris. Because I was a coward, he said, his voice barely a whisper. And because I loved you both. The words were so audacious, so profoundly selfish, that a laugh escaped my lips. It was a harsh, bitter sound. You don't know what love is, I said. You think love is this? Deceit, betrayal, building a nursery for your mistress's baby while your wife is at home waiting for you? That's not love, Mark. That's a sickness. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never wanted to hurt you. You never wanted to get caught. I corrected him, my voice dripping with contempt. You wanted your comfortable life with me, your supportive wife and your beautiful house. And you wanted your exciting, secret life with her, the adoring mistress and the thrill of the affair. You wanted everything. And you didn't care who you had to destroy to get it. He sank onto the sofa, the one he shared with her, and put his head in his hands. I know I messed up. But Ellie, the baby, it changes things. Oh, it changes everything. I agreed, a cold smile touching my lips. It makes my decision very, very easy. I met with a divorce lawyer this morning. Mark, I've already started the proceedings. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with genuine shock. He truly believed, even now, that he could somehow fix this, that I would just accept his new, blended family. The arrogance was breathtaking. No, he said, shaking his head. You can't. What about our life? Our house? There is no us anymore, I said, the words feeling more true and liberating with every second. There is just you, and her, and your baby. And then there's me. And I'm starting over. Without you. You can have this life you've built. You can have this apartment, and these pictures, and you can have her. But you will never, ever have me again. I turned to walk away, my final words delivered. But then he said the one thing that managed to break through my icy resolve. It was your fault, too. You know, he said quietly, his voice laced with a bitter, Defensive edge. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob, and turned back to face him. What did you just say? He stood up, his self-pity morphing into blame. You were always so wrapped up in your own world. Your studio. Your clay. Your art. You were there. But you weren't there. I was lonely. Ellie. I was lonely in our marriage. Chloe, she saw me. She listened to me. She was interested in my life. My work. The accusation. So profoundly unfair. So completely twisted. Finally shattered my control. The cold box where I had stored my emotions burst open, and a white hot rage poured out. Lonely? I shrieked, the sound raw and torn from my throat. You were lonely. I put my career on hold for you. I moved to Seattle for you. I built my entire life around your schedule. Your needs. Your ambition. I celebrated every success with you. And I held you through every failure. That studio was the one place that was mine. The one place I didn't have to be Mark Vance's wife. And you want to blame me for having it? You are pathetic. Tears were streaming down my face now. Hot tears of anger and betrayal. You weren't lonely. Mark. You were just greedy. And you will spend the rest of your life trying to fill that black hole inside of you. But you will never be happy. Because people like you never are. I didn't wait for a response. I ripped the door open and fled, leaving him standing alone in the ruins of the life he had so carelessly built. The confrontation left me utterly hollowed out. The rage that had propelled me through the door of that apartment evaporated the moment I was back in Sarah's car, leaving behind a vast, desolate emptiness. I had said everything I needed to say, had faced him with the full scope of his betrayal, but there was no sense of victory. There was only the aching, cavernous space where my marriage used to be. Sarah drove me back to her place in silence, occasionally glancing over at me with worried eyes. I was numb, my mind replaying his final words over and over again. It was your fault, too. You were always so wrapped up in your own world. The audacity of his blame was staggering. A final, cruel twist of the knife. He hadn't just broken my heart. He had tried to make me believe I had handed him the weapon. The days that followed were a blur of legalities and logistics. A cold, impersonal process that felt completely disconnected from the emotional cataclysm I was living through. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Catherine, was brutally efficient. She walked me through the process of filing for divorce, dividing assets, and the grim reality of community property law in Washington state. Because Mark had used our shared funds to finance his secret life, I was legally entitled to half of everything, including the value of the secret apartment and the money in his hidden bank account. The thought brought me no comfort. It all felt like blood money. The hardest part was going back to the house to pack. Sarah insisted on coming with me. Mark had agreed, through his lawyer, to stay away until I had moved my things out. Walking through the front door was like stepping onto the set of a movie about my own life. Everything was exactly as I had left it. But it was all meaningless now. A collection of props. We worked in a grim, determined silence, filling boxes with my clothes, my books, my life. Every object held a memory, now poisoned. The beautiful ceramic bowls we bought on our honeymoon in Italy. The framed photo of us on the day we brought home our golden retriever puppy, a dog who had died of old age 2 years ago. I felt a pang of gratitude that our old friend wasn't here to witness this. I walked into my studio. It was the only room in the house that still felt like mine. My tools, my clay, my kiln. My work was all around math graceful, symmetrical pieces from before, and the new, fractured vases I had started making when the first cracks in my marriage began to show. I looked at them now, these physical manifestations of my own denial and burgeoning pain. I wanted to smash every single one of them. Don't, Sarah said softly, coming up behind me. She must have seen the look on my face. Don't destroy them. They're a part of your story. It's a story I don't want to remember. I whispered, my hand hovering over a large, elegant platter I had spent weeks perfecting. A platter Mark had once called a masterpiece. You don't have to remember it fondly, she said. But you have to remember it. You have to own it. This is how you got here. This is the before. What comes next? That's up to you. She was right. I couldn't erase the past. I couldn't smash it into oblivion. I had to find a way to carry it, to let it become a part of whatever new shape my life was going to take. I moved into a small, sunlit apartment in Ballard, a neighborhood with a grittier, more artistic vibe than the polished world Mark and I had inhabited. It was small. The rooms were a little crooked, and the view was of a brick wall. But it was mine. I filled it with my books, my plants, and the few pieces of furniture that didn't scream of my old life. I set up a corner of the living room as a temporary studio. But the bags of clay sat untouched. The creative fire inside me had been extinguished. Drowned by the flood of grief, the divorce proceedings dragged on. Mark, it turned out, was not going to make things easy. His initial contrition had quickly curdled into a bitter, defensive anger. He fought Catherine on every point, from the division of her art collection to the valuation of his architectural firm partnership. His lawyers tried to paint a picture of me as a flighty, emotionally unstable artist, implying that my neglect had driven him into the arms of another woman. It was a disgusting, transparent tactic, a continuation of the blame shifting he had started in the apartment. "This is what they do," Catherine told me coolly after a particularly nasty conference call. "They try to turn his infidelity into your failure. Don't let them. Just keep your head down and let me handle it." I tried. But it was hard. Every legal document, every email from Catherine, was another reminder of the life I had lost and the man I had married, who was now a vindictive stranger. I felt adrift, my identity completely untethered. For 10 years, I had been Ellie Vance, wife of Mark, keeper of a beautiful home, a successful artist in a supportive partnership. Now, who was I? Just Ellie, a divorcee, a woman whose life had imploded. The loneliness was the worst part. The silence of my small apartment was a constant, oppressive presence. I missed the small routines of marriage, the comfortable companionship, even the sound of another person's breathing in the dark. I missed the man I thought Mark was, the one who had made me laugh and held me when I was sad. I was mourning a ghost, a man who had never really existed. One rainy Tuesday, about a month after I'd moved out, I was walking aimlessly through Fremont when I found myself standing outside the small gallery that was supposed to have hosted my show. The windows were filled with another artist's work, bright, cheerful abstract paintings. A wave of regret and failure washed over me. I had let him take that from me, too. My work, my passion. I turned to leave, but the gallery owner, a kind, gray-haired woman named Lena, saw me through the window and waved me inside. "Eliza," she said, her voice warm, "I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up?" The simple kindness in her voice made my throat tighten. "I'm okay," I lied. She gave me a knowing look. "The offer still stands. You know, whenever you're ready. The space is yours." "I don't think I'll be ready for a long time," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. I can't seem to work. It's like the part of me that creates is broken." Lena led me to a small office in the back and made me a cup of tea. "Art doesn't come from a place of peace, my dear," she said, her hands wrapped around her own steaming mug. "It comes from chaos. It comes from joy. Yes, but it also comes from rage and grief and heartbreak. The most powerful art is the stuff that is torn from you. You feel broken right now. I can see that. But sometimes, you have to break completely before you can rebuild yourself into something stronger." We sat and talked for over an hour. She told me about her own painful divorce years ago, and how she had poured her heartbreak into her painting, creating the best work of her life. "Don't try to make the art you used to make," she advised as I was leaving. "That person is gone. Make the art that the new you needs to make. Even if it's ugly. Even if it hurts. Especially if it hurts." Her words echoed in my mind all the way home. Make the art the new you needs to make. When I got back to my apartment, I walked over to the corner, where my pottery wheel and clay were sitting under a dusty sheet. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker, a tiny, hesitant spark in the cold, dead ashes of my creativity. I pulled off the sheet. I sat down at the wheel. I didn't have a plan. I just took a large lump of cold, damp clay and threw it onto the wheel. I centered it, my hands moving with a muscle memory I thought I had lost. But I didn't build it up into a graceful shape. Instead, I let my anger and pain guide my hands. I slammed my fist into the spinning clay, creating a deep, violent indentation. I gouged the sides with my fingernails, leaving ragged, raw marks. I twisted and distorted the form, pushing it to its limits, daring it to collapse. I worked for hours, my body slick with sweat and clay, my mind blissfully, wonderfully empty. I wasn't thinking. I was just feeling. I was pouring all the ugliness, all the rage, all the grief into the earth in my hands. When I was finally done, the thing sitting on the wheel was barely recognizable as a vessel. It was a sculpture. It was lopsided, scarred, and brutally misshapen. It was fractured, asymmetrical, and deeply unsettling to look at. It was the most honest thing I had ever made. That night, something shifted inside me. I had found a language for my pain, a way to externalize the chaos that was raging inside me. The next day, I was back at the wheel, and the day after that, I began to work with a manic, obsessive energy. I wasn't just making art, I was performing an exorcism. I took the beautiful, symmetrical vases I had brought from my old studio, the ones Sarah had told me not to destroy, and I broke them. I smashed them with a hammer, the sound of the shattering porcelain both agonizing and deeply satisfying. Then, I painstakingly began to piece them back together using the Japanese art of kintsugi, where breaks are repaired with gold lacquer. The philosophy behind it is that the object becomes more beautiful for having been broken. The cracks were not something to be hidden, but a celebrated part of its history. My little apartment became a factory of brokenness and repair. The pieces I was creating were raw and powerful. They were a world away from the elegant, controlled art I used to make. This work was bleeding. It was screaming. It was healing. One day, I got a call from Catherine. "We have a settlement offer from Mark's lawyers," she said, her voice crisp. "He's caving. He's giving us almost everything we asked for." "Why?" I asked, shocked. His stubborn fight had been a constant source of stress for months. "Because Chloe's pregnancy is becoming more public. His firm is getting nervous about the optics of a messy, protracted divorce with accusations of infidelity. They want this to go away, quietly and quickly. He's agreed to sign everything over, including his claim to the house." The house? Our house? It was going to be mine. The news should have felt like a victory, but it just felt heavy. "What do I do with it?" I asked Catherine. The question more for myself than for her. "Most people in your position sell it," she said pragmatically. "Take the money and start fresh. It holds too many memories." After I hung up, I sat in the middle of my chaotic apartment studio, surrounded by my broken and beautiful new art. Catherine was right. The house held too many memories. But maybe, I thought, maybe I didn't need to run from them anymore. Maybe I needed to face them. Maybe I needed to go back to the place where my life fell apart, and see if I could build something new in the ruins. The day the divorce was finalized was gray and drizzly, a quintessentially Seattle sky that perfectly mirrored my mood. There was no celebration, no triumphant toast with Sarah. There was only a quiet, hollow finality. I walked out of the lawyer's office with a stack of papers that officially declared me a single woman and the sole owner of a house I no longer considered a home. The marriage was over. 10 years of my life, summarized and concluded in a signature blog. For a week, I did nothing. I avoided the house. The thought of stepping back inside that monument to my former life was paralyzing. I stayed in my small Ballard apartment, which was beginning to feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a cramped cage. My new, raw work filled every available surface, a constant, visceral reminder of the trauma that had created it. The pieces were powerful, but living with them was like living with open wounds. Sarah, in her infinite and brutal wisdom, was the one who forced my hand. She showed up one morning with 2 large coffees and a determined look in her eye. "Okay, enough," she announced, setting a coffee in front of me. "The pity party is officially over. You own a beautiful, empty house with a world-class pottery studio, and you are living in a showbox, sleeping next to a sculpture that looks like it wants to murder you. It's time to go home." "Ellie, it's not my home anymore," I mumbled into my cup. "Then make it your home," she insisted. "Exorcist the demons. Throw out his crap. Paint the walls. Have a bonfire in the backyard. I don't care what you do. But you can't let him win by turning you into a refugee from your own life." Her words, harsh as they were, struck a chord. She was right. By avoiding the house, I was letting him keep it. Emotionally, if not legally. I was letting his memory, his betrayal, have power over me. So, the next day, we went. Sarah drove, and as we pulled into the driveway, my heart hammered against my ribs. The house looked the same, modern, beautiful, imposing, but it felt different. It felt cold. We started in the bedroom. His closet was already empty, his clothes gone, but his presence lingered. The books on his nightstand, the expensive watch he'd forgotten in a drawer, the scent of his cologne still clinging to the curtains. Sarah and I were ruthless. We got trash bags and swept through the room, clearing every last trace of him. It was a cleansing. A violent reclaiming of space. We were a two-woman demolition crew, tearing down the set of our shared life. We worked our way through the house, room by room. It was exhausting, emotionally and physically. Every drawer I opened, every box I sorted, held a potential landmine. A birthday card he'd written me, a ticket stub from our first concert. Each discovery was a fresh, sharp jab of pain. But with each bag of his belongings that we hauled to the curb, I felt a little lighter. I was literally and figuratively getting rid of the baggage. The last room was his office. This was the hardest. This was his sanctuary, the place where he had planned his career. And I now knew. Planned his deception. His desk was clear, but the shelves were still lined with his architectural books and blueprints. As I was packing them into a box, something slipped from between the pages of a thick volume on urban design. It was a photograph, a candid shot of me, taken years ago. I was in my studio, covered in clay, laughing at something off camera. I was radiant, unburdened, and completely unaware of the storm gathering just over the horizon. Looking at that picture of the happy, naive woman I used to be was almost unbearable. He had kept this picture, tucked away in a book in his office. What did it mean? Was it a reminder of what he was throwing away? Or was it just another piece of the life he was trying to compartmentalize? A token of the wife he was so easily replacing? I would never know. I stared at the photo for a long time. Then I gently placed it in a box with my own things. She was a part of my story, too. I couldn't throw her away. After 3 long days, the house was empty of him. It was just a shell, filled with my things and the ghosts of 1,000 memories. It didn't feel like home yet, but it no longer felt like his. With the physical space cleared, I turned my attention back to my work. I moved everything from my cramped apartment studio back into the real thing spacious, light-filled garage Mark had designed for me. Being back in that space was strange. It was a gift from him, a place born of his love, or what I had thought was love. But it was also my sanctuary, the one place that had always been truly mine. I decided then and there that I would reclaim it, just as I was reclaiming the house. I called Lena at the gallery. "Is that offer still on the table?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "For you, Eliza. Always," she said warmly. "When do you want to do it?" 6 weeks, I said, the timeline feeling both terrifyingly short and absolutely necessary. I needed a deadline. I needed a purpose beyond just surviving. I needed to turn all of this pain into something tangible, something that existed outside of my own head. The next 6 weeks were the most intense, productive, and emotionally draining of my life. I worked like a woman possessed. I barely slept. I ate standing up in the studio. I poured every ounce of my anger, my grief, my confusion, and my nascent hope into the clay. I continued my kintsugi work, breaking and mending, finding beauty in the scars. I created a series of sculptures I called The Lie, each one representing a different stage of my discovery. There was a piece that was smooth and perfect on one side, but jagged and hollow on the other. There was another that was a tangle of sharp, broken shards, barely held together. And there was a large, central piece I simply called Nursery, a crib-like structure made of cracked, crumbling porcelain. The work was dark. It was painful. It was unapologetically honest. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like myself again. Not the old me. The happy, trusting wife. This was someone new. Someone who had walked through fire and was learning how to live with the burns. The night of the gallery opening, I was a wreck. My hands were shaking as I got dressed. What if no one came? What if they came and they hated it? What if they saw my work not as art, but as a pathetic, public display of my personal heartbreak? "Stop it," Sarah commanded, zipping up the back of my simple black dress. "This is not about them. This is about you. You made this. You survived this. That's the victory. The rest is just noise." The gallery was packed. Word had gotten out about my long-awaited return, and the Seattle art community had turned out in force. I stood in a corner, my heart in my throat, and watched as people moved through the space, looking at my work. They were quiet, contemplative. They didn't just glance at the pieces. They studied them. They leaned in close to examine the golden cracks in the kintsugi bowls. They stood for long moments in front of the jagged, angry sculptures. They were reading my story. Lena found me, her eyes shining. "You've done it, Eliza," she whispered, squeezing my arm. "This is transcendent. It's painful, but it's hopeful." Everyone feels it. People started coming up to me. Strangers. They didn't offer condolences. They offered connection. An older woman with kind eyes told me my work reminded her of her own recovery after losing her son. A young man told me one of the sculptures perfectly captured how he felt about his father's alcoholism. They weren't just seeing my pain. They were seeing their own. They were seeing the universal human experience of being broken and finding a way to go on. In sharing my most personal trauma, I had stumbled upon a universal truth. I was talking to a critic from a local art magazine when I felt a sudden chill. I looked towards the gallery entrance, and he was there. Mark was standing just inside the doorway, half hidden in the shadows. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the art. He moved slowly through the gallery, a ghost at the feast. I watched his face as he looked at each piece. I saw him flinch at the sculpture titled The Lie. I saw his eyes linger on the shattered beauty of the kintsugi bowls. Then, he stopped in front of the final, most devastating piece, the porcelain crib. Nursery. He stood there for what felt like an eternity. His shoulders slumped. The arrogant, confident architect was gone. In his place was a man weighed down by the full, undeniable consequences of his actions. He was seeing his betrayal, not through my words, but through my art. It was all there, laid bare for the world to see, the ugliness, the deceit, the wreckage he had left behind. He finally looked up, and his eyes met mine from across the crowded room. There was no anger in his gaze, no defensiveness, only a deep, profound sadness, a look of recognition. He saw me, truly saw me. Perhaps for the first time, he saw the woman he had shattered, and he saw the artist she had become in spite of him. He gave a small, almost imperceptible noted gesture of defeat, of acknowledgement, perhaps even of apology, and then he turned and walked out of the gallery, disappearing into the night. The critic I had been talking to turned back to me. "That was Mark Vance, wasn't it?" he asked quietly. I took a deep breath, my eyes still on the empty doorway. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady. "He was my husband." It was the first time I had used the past tense. Was. In that moment, watching him walk away from the tangible evidence of my pain and my survival, I felt the final chain break. He was no longer the main character in my story, or even the villain. He was just a chapter, a dark, painful chapter that I had finally finished writing. The gallery show was a turning point. It wasn't just a success, it was a resurrection. The art critic wrote a glowing review, calling the collection a raw, courageous exploration of betrayal and rebirth. My pieces began to sell, one after another, to collectors who saw more than just broken pottery. They saw a story of survival. But the true victory wasn't the sales or the praise. It was the quiet, internal shift that had taken place within me. Standing in that gallery, surrounded by the physical manifestation of my pain, I had transformed my trauma into something beautiful, something powerful. I had taken the ugliest chapter of my life and I had made it art. Mark's presence there, his silent witnessing of my truth, had not reopened the wound. Instead, it had felt like a final, necessary closure. He had seen what he had done, not just to me, but to himself. In the weeks that followed, a new kind of quiet settled into my life. It wasn't the hollow, lonely silence of my early days in the Ballard apartment. It was a peaceful, contemplative quiet. I took the money from the art sales and invested it back into my work, buying a new, larger kiln and transforming the studio into a more professional space. The house began to feel like home again, but a different kind of home. I painted the walls a warm, earthy terracotta. I filled the rooms with plants and with my own art. The ghost of Mark Vance was finally gone, exorcised not by anger, but by creation. I started to reconnect with the world outside my studio. I had coffee with friends I had neglected. I took long walks along the beach at Golden Gardens, watching the ships glide across the Sound. I was learning to be alone without being lonely. I was discovering who Ellie was, without the Vance attached. About 2 months after the gallery show, I received an unexpected email. It was from a woman named Maria, a curator at a prestigious contemporary craft museum in San Francisco. She had seen the article about my show and was intrigued. She was coming to Seattle and asked if she could arrange a studio visit. I was stunned. This was the kind of opportunity I had only dreamed of before. In my old life, I might have let the fear of not being good enough hold me back. I might have deferred to Mark, asking his opinion, letting his confidence bolster my own. But the new me, the one who had walked through hell and built a new life from the ashes, simply wrote back, "I would be delighted. When are you available?" Maria's visit was a whirlwind. She was a chic, intelligent woman with a sharp eye and an even sharper mind. She walked through my studio, studying each piece with an intense focus. She didn't say much, but she asked probing, insightful questions about my process, my materials, and the emotional intent behind the work. "You're not just making pottery, are you?" she said, running a finger over a golden seam in a kintsugi vase. "No," I replied. "I'm telling a story. It's a powerful one," she said. "And I think it's a story a lot of people need to hear. We're putting together a major exhibition next year. It's called The Art of Mending. It's about artists who use themes of damage and repair in their work. I think your collection would be the perfect centerpiece." I felt my knees go weak. A major exhibition in a San Francisco museum. It was the kind of validating, career-defining moment I had long ago given up on, convincing myself that a quiet, small-scale life was enough. I don't know what to say," I stammered. "Say yes," Maria said with a smile. And I did. I said yes to the opportunity. Yes to the future. Yes to the life that was unfolding before me. A life I was building on my own terms. The news propelled me into a fresh wave of creative energy. I had a new purpose. A new story to tell. It wasn't just about the breaking anymore. Now, it was about the mending. My work began to evolve. The raw, angry edges softened. The pieces were still fractured. The scars still visible. But now they held a sense of peace, of acceptance. They were less about the pain of the wound and more about the strength it takes to heal. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I was loading a new series of pieces into the kiln, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the studio door and peered out. It was a nondescript sedan I didn't recognize. The driver's side door opened, and a woman got out. It was Chloe. My entire body went rigid. I hadn't seen her or heard from her since that night at the hospital. Seeing her standing there, in my driveway, felt like a violation. She looked different. The polished, confident assistant was gone. She was wearing simple jeans and a sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was heavily pregnant. The large, round swell of her belly obvious even under her loose clothing. She saw me standing in the doorway and stopped, a look of uncertainty on her face. She clutched her purse with both hands, a nervous, protective gesture. "Ellie," she said, her voice soft. "I'm so sorry to just show up like this. I know I'm the last person in the world you want to see." I didn't say anything. I just stood there, my arms crossed, a silent, unmovable wall. I needed to talk to you," she continued, taking a hesitant step forward. "To apologize. Properly. Not the pathetic lie I told you in the hospital." "An apology?" I said, my voice dripping with ice. "It's a little late for that, don't you think?" Tears welled in her eyes. I know it is. And I know it doesn't change anything. But I have to say it. I was wrong. What we did, it was cruel and unforgivable. There's no excuse for it." I stared at her, at the woman who had helped my husband dismantle my life. I saw the genuine remorse in her eyes, but it did little to soften the hard knot of anger in my chest. "Why are you here, Chloe? Really? What do you want from me? Forgiveness? Absolution? You're not going to get it. I don't expect it," she whispered, her gaze dropping to the ground. I saw the article about your art show. A friend sent it to me. I saw the pictures of your work, the titles, the lie, nursery. And I finally understood. I mean, I knew I had hurt you. But I didn't understand the depth of it. Not until I saw it like that. You took the ugliest thing imaginable and you made it into something true. Something beautiful. And I've just been living with the ugliness. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "He's not the man I thought he was. Ellie. The charm. The promises, it's all an act." Once the thrill of the secret was gone, once it all came out into the open, everything changed. The man I'm with now is bitter, and angry, and full of blame. He blames me. He blames his firm. He even blames the baby for ruining his life. A cold, bitter satisfaction curled in my stomach, and I immediately felt ashamed of it. Her pain, her disillusionment, brought me no real pleasure. It just highlighted the tragedy of it all. We were two women, connected by the same man's lies, both left to deal with the wreckage he created. He told me you were basically separated. She said, her voice barely a whisper, that your marriage was over in all but name. He said you lived in different worlds, that you hadn't been intimate in years. I was stupid enough to believe him. I wanted to believe him. I just shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. The lies were even more insidious than I had imagined. Why are you telling me this? I asked again, my voice softer this time. Because you deserve to know the truth, she said. And because I don't want to bring my son into this world with this poison still inside me. I had to face you. I had to tell you that I am so sorry for the pain I caused you. You didn't deserve any of it. We stood there in silence for a long moment, the cool autumn air swirling around us. I looked at her, this young woman whose life was now irrevocably tangled with the man who had ruined mine. I didn't feel forgiveness. That was a mountain I wasn't yet ready to climb. But the white-hot rage had cooled, leaving behind something closer to a sad, weary pity. She was just another casualty of Mark's profound selfishness. Thank you for coming, I said finally, the words feeling strange and inadequate. I appreciate you telling me. It was a dismissal, and we both knew it. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I hope one day you find happiness. Ellie, you deserve it. She turned and walked back to her car, her movements slow and heavy. I watched her drive away until the car was just a speck down the road. I stood in my studio doorway for a long time, the kiln humming behind me, the smell of the damp earth in the air. Her visit hadn't healed me, but it had shifted something. It had brought the story full circle. I was no longer just the wronged wife. She was no longer just the villainous other woman. We were both just people, caught in the undertow of a destructive man, trying to find our way back to shore. Chloe's visit lingered in my mind for days. It didn't erase the past or diminish the pain, but it did file down some of the sharpest edges of my anger. Seeing her, so lost and disillusioned, stripped the affair of its last vestiges of glamour and intrigue. It wasn't a grand, passionate romance that had destroyed my marriage. It was just a shabby, selfish betrayal built on a foundation of pathetic lies. It was a story as old as time, and my part in it was finally, truly over. My focus shifted entirely to the San Francisco exhibition. The work consumed me in the best possible way. It was my purpose, my passion, and my therapy, all rolled into one. I packed up my pieces with meticulous care, each sculpture and vase a piece of my own history, a testament to my survival. Sarah helped me build the custom crates, her steady presence a constant source of support. Are you nervous? She asked as we carefully laid the last kintsugi bowl into its foam-lined bed. Terrified, I admitted with a laugh. But it's a good terrified. It's the kind of fear that feels like the prelude to something wonderful. That's my girl, she said, beaming. You went from heartbroken to headliner. I am so ridiculously proud of you. Flying down to San Francisco a few days before the opening felt surreal. I walked into the vast, white-walled gallery of the museum and saw my work being carefully unpacked and placed on pedestals, under professional lighting. Seeing my art in that space, this hallowed ground I had only ever visited as an admirer, was a profoundly emotional experience. The pieces looked different here. They looked important. The story they told me felt bigger, more universal. The night of the opening was a blur of faces, champagne, and conversations. People from all walks of life, art critics, collectors, students, fellow artists wanted to talk to me about my work. They shared their own stories of loss and mending, of finding beauty in the broken places. I realized that my art had become a conduit for connection, a way for people to talk about the things that are often too painful to put into words. Towards the end of the evening, Maria, the curator, pulled me aside. There's someone here who would like to meet you, she said, a twinkle in her eye. She led me over to an older man with kind eyes and a warm smile. Eliza Vance. This is Ben Carter. The name was familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it. He was a woodworker, a furniture maker. I had seen his work in galleries. It was stunning, elegant, organic, with a deep respect for the natural form of the wood. Your work is breathtaking, he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. I've been a potter myself, off and on, 4 years. But what you do with the breaks, with the scars, it's profound. We talked for a long time, easily and naturally. We talked about art, about process, about the way a piece of wood or a lump of clay can tell you what it wants to become. He told me about his wife, who had passed away a few years ago after a long illness. He spoke of his own journey through grief, of how his work had been his salvation. There was an immediate, unspoken understanding between us, the quiet kinship of two people who had navigated the deep waters of loss and found their way back to the light through their craft. The exhibition was a phenomenal success, and my life changed in ways I could never have anticipated. Galleries from New York to London were calling. I was invited to teach workshops, to give lectures. I started traveling, something I had rarely done with Mark, who had always been too busy with work. I saw the world through my own eyes, on my own terms. I was no longer a supporting character in someone else's story. I was a protagonist of my own. Ben and I stayed in touch. We started with emails, then long phone calls. A few months after the exhibition, he came up to Seattle to visit. We spent a weekend walking on the beach, visiting galleries, and sitting in my studio, talking for hours while I worked. Being with him was easy. It was calm. There were no games, no secrets, just a quiet, comfortable respect. He wasn't trying to fix me or save me. He simply saw me, all of meth artist, the survivor, the woman with scars, and he thought the scars were beautiful. 1 year after the night I followed my husband to the hospital, I found myself standing on the deck of my house, looking out at the calm, gray waters of Puget Sound. The house was quiet, filled with the late afternoon sun. My new work, pieces that spoke of healing and hope, were scattered around my studio. My life was full of friends, of work that I loved, of new possibilities. The front door opened and Ben walked out onto the deck, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to me, his fingers brushing against mine. The touch was simple, gentle, and it filled me with a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, standing beside me. I took a sip of my tea and looked out at the horizon. "I was just thinking about how much can change in a year," I said. "A year ago, I thought my life was over. I thought the best parts of me had been destroyed." "They weren't destroyed," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "They were just buried. You had to dig them out." He was right. The woman I was today had been inside me all along. Her strength, her resilience, her artistic voice. But she had been quieted, suppressed by the need to maintain a perfect life, to be the perfect wife. It had taken the complete shattering of that life for her to finally emerge. The betrayal hadn't created her, but it had set her free. I thought of Mark, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, not even pity. He was just a fact, a part of my history. Like a childhood illness I had long since recovered from. I heard through the grapevine that he and Chloe had had their baby, a boy, and had moved to a suburb on the east side, trying to build a new life. I wished them no ill will. Their story was no longer my concern. My story was here, in this house I had reclaimed, in the studio where I brought new things to life, in the quiet, hopeful future that stretched out before me. "You know," I said, turning to Ben with a small smile, "I spent so many years making these perfect, symmetrical, unbroken things. I thought that's what beauty was. Flawlessness." I reached out and traced one of the laugh lines around his eyes. "But it's not. Beauty is in the cracks. It's in the mending. It's in the courage it takes to pick up the pieces and make something new." He smiled. A slow, wonderful smile that made his whole face light up. He leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of desperate passion or hidden secrets. It was a kiss of quiet understanding, of shared histories, of two broken souls who had found a way to be whole again. Not in spite of their scars, but because of them. The sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and pink. I leaned my head on his shoulder, the warm mug in my hands, and watched the light dance on the water. I was at peace. My life wasn't perfect. It would never be. But it was real. And it was mine. And it was beautiful.